My brother didn't just steal my girlfriend, he stole my entire life, like he just erased me from it in one swift move. He thought he was some kind of genius, confident his perfect escape would go off without a hitch. But what lay ahead for him was something he couldn't have predicted. Now, it's time to talk about the real show. So, my name is Mike, I'm 26, and here's what you really wouldn't want to be dealing with at this age. Worrying that your older brother, Dan, is about to completely wreck your personal life. You see, we've always been close, and I really believed that Dan was someone I could rely on 100%. He's 30, and he wasn't just my brother. He was my older friend, someone who understood me without words, knew everything about me, and I swear, would have backed me up in any situation. But then something happened that I never could have expected. My wedding to Lily was on the horizon. She's 25 and has been my girlfriend for almost 4 years. We're that couple that people secretly hate for being almost unrealistically happy and harmonious. We've always been on the same wavelength, understood each other, and most importantly, knew that no matter what each of us was doing, together, we made the perfect team. You know, the kind of relationship where you feel like you're in a good movie with a happy ending. In short, life was going according to plan until my older brother stepped in, and I started noticing his antics. Dan came back to town unexpectedly. He hadn't planned on coming, but something made him change his mind out of the blue. At first, I was glad because I wanted him there at this important moment. He's the only relative I'm genuinely close to. So, he came back, and I thought everything was good. I'd have his support, and Lily would gain another friend. But within a couple of weeks, I started noticing strange things. You know, those moments when you know something's off, but you can't quite figure out what it is. Dan kept finding reasons to be around Lily, at first subtly, under the pretense of helping with wedding preparations, but then more frequently and for longer periods. I even started getting the feeling that he was acting like this was his wedding, not mine. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just getting anxious before the wedding. I figured Dan was simply jealous of how close Lily and I were, and he wanted to be a part of our happiness. After all, who wouldn't want a relationship like that? I thought it was kind of sweet. He was just trying to be friends with both of us. But what was really odd was how he showered Lily with compliments and avoided eye contact with me whenever I caught on. It was like he was trying to play along, but in reality, he was fixated on one thing, being closer to her than he was to me. All right, I thought. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe he's just trying to be there for her when I can't spend time with her. But soon enough, things started getting even more suspicious. One day, he suggested to Lily that they spend time together, to, as he put it, get to know each other better before the wedding. It sounded innocent, but it rubbed me the wrong way. I tried to laugh it off, but something clicked inside. So picture this. I'm standing at the threshold of a new life, dreaming of future family bliss, but now I'm starting to notice that something is seriously wrong. Dan and Lily have, how should I say it, a special friendship. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that pre-wedding stress was getting to me, but I can't deny it. Every time Dan and Lily were together, it felt like I was the third wheel at their little shared interests club. At some point, my patience ran out, and I decided to talk to her. I went straight to the point. Hey, what's with this close friendship with Dan? Instead of laughing it off and saying something like, "Oh, Mike, are you serious?" Lily hesitated. "It's just a friendship," she said. "Don't get worked up. I get that you're a little nervous before the wedding." Sure, everyone gets nervous before a wedding, wondering if their fiancée is going to start spending more time with their brother than with them. But fine, I thought. Let's go with that. However, something in her tone subtly shifted. Her excuses became increasingly rehearsed, and my nerves only got more frayed. She explained that she was just supporting Dan through a tough time. Funny, who was there to support me? And that he was like a brother to her. Classic line, straight out of a movie. He's like a brother to me. Only now, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was way more to this than just friendship. The more she talked, the less I believed her. It was like watching some bad, cheesy movie with an obvious plot, where everyone knows what's going on except the main character. Meanwhile, I started noticing that Dan was acting strangely too. He seemed to avoid talking about me altogether, carefully hiding his meetups and trips with Lily. Sometimes he'd even take my phone, glance at the screen, and with a sickly sweet smile, comment on how lucky I was to have such a great girl. His words sounded surprisingly genuine, but his eyes were always darting somewhere, and that was what started to really worry me. I couldn't tell if he was trying to convince me, himself, or Lily, but the whole situation was turning into an absurd theater, with me cast as the main clown. At some point, I started sensing something deeper in his comments, as if he was literally training himself to believe his own lies. These thoughts became a waking nightmare. I stopped sleeping well, tossing and turning, waking up with the most paranoid ideas. Honestly, the feeling didn't leave me for a minute. Finally, one night, when Lily left her phone at my place, I decided to check it. Yeah, I know, it's low. But when you feel like something that serious is going on behind your back, you're left with only one choice, you or the truth. And I chose the truth. What I found made my heart pound. In just a few messages, like something out of a trashy romance novel, Dan poured out his feelings to Lily. He wrote about how hard it was for him to see her with me, and how he loved her. Yes, the most ridiculous thing I'd ever read in my life, but also the most terrifying. I stood there in the dark, clutching her phone, feeling like I was going to explode. I read it over and over, hoping I'd spot a joke, some hint that it was all a prank. But no, this was real. Shockingly, terrifyingly real. So, a couple of days after finding those sweet messages from Dan, I was still trying to maintain the appearance of a normal life. Yeah, it's hard to keep going when you literally know that there's a whole romance brewing behind your back. But the game was just beginning, and I decided I would watch just how far they were willing to go. Then Lily came up to me, and from the moment she walked in, it was obvious she was here for a heart-to-heart, her face giving away everything except a sense of calm. She starts with, "Mike, you've probably noticed that I've been a bit distant," and some other vague remarks about needing time. Right, time is definitely what she needs. It was immediately clear to me. It wasn't that she needed time to think. She'd already made up her mind. She just didn't have the courage to say it to my face. "You know, Mike, I need to think about us," she said, as if there even was an us anymore. She kept mumbling, dragging out her words painfully, and I just stood there, waiting for her to finally say it all straight. I didn't interrupt. I was even a little curious to see what she'd come up with next. But as she went on, I realized she was basically trying to break me down, subtly steering me to see our whole relationship as some kind of mistake. Honestly, it was nauseating. That evening, I got a message from Dan. "Hey, let's meet up. We need to talk. It's important." I thought, well, this should be interesting. What else could he possibly add to this picture of brotherly support? When we met, he immediately took on the role of the wise older brother. He sat across from me, eyes down, and came out with a few lines like, "You know, Mike, Lily's going through a tough time right now. Maybe you guys should take a break. I feel she's having doubts about this marriage." That hit hard. My older brother, the person I trusted, with no hint of shame, was suggesting I take a break. And this after all the years Lily and I had been together. But he played his role perfectly, feigning concern for our happiness. If I hadn't known better, I might have actually believed him. I stayed silent. I just sat there because I had no words. Inside, I was boiling with humiliation, pain, and anger. "Yeah," he talked, and I listened. But inside, I was already forming a plan for revenge that he had no idea was coming. That was the moment I knew he was unstoppable. And incidentally, so was I. That night, as I lay in my room, I heard Lily get up and go into another. Nothing unusual at first. She'd just left. I might have even thought she was feeling unwell if I hadn't heard her whispering with Dan. Her voice was muffled, as if she was afraid I'd hear. And honestly, I would have preferred to just fall asleep, to avoid hearing how they were putting their perfect plan into action. But then I caught words that changed everything. Dan said he'd already bought plane tickets to Canada. They were planning to leave. He even added, "We need to go as soon as possible, so Mike doesn't feel cornered." How exactly was I supposed to feel, listening to my brother and fiancée secretly plotting their new life together? I lay in the dark, listening to their whispering, knowing this was the point of no return. You know, when someone steals your dreams, and the thief happens to be your own brother, that's, to put it mildly, unpleasant. But when you're lying there at night, listening to him and your fiancé talking about running away, like it's some kind of secret escape mission, the anger that fills you is so intense, you don't even know where to begin. They thought their plan would work, that they'd run off to Canada and leave me here to stew in this absurdity. Well, it was time to show them that sometimes plans don't go as smoothly as expected. Once their whispers faded and they went to bed, I was already filled with a grim resolve. They ruined my life? Fine, let them get a taste of it themselves. And that's when it struck me. Let their escape be as chaotic and memorable as possible. Let their little getaway turn into the nightmare of their lives. I lay there until morning, going over the plan in my head. No rushing, just cold, calculated steps like a professional predator. By the end, I knew exactly what to do. I'd start by delaying their flight. Does that sound small? For a pair of lovers on the run, it would turn into a nightmare. Waking up in the morning, if you can even call it sleep, the first thing I did was grab my phone and start calling everyone I could think of who might help. Thanks to friends, a couple of old contacts, and some acquaintances who worked at the airport, I had a small network in place. They have their own rules at work, of course, but if you need just a little extra security screening, it can usually be arranged. My request was simple: a random document check, a minor baggage delay, and of course, a final surprise to verify their tickets. Nothing criminal, just standard formalities, but when you're rushing to slip out of the country, even an extra 5 minutes can make you sweat. And if those minutes keep adding up... So yeah, I spent the entire night mapping out the details. I decided they needed to feel their plan crumbling before their eyes, with panic building by the second. The morning arrived, the day of their great escape. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, my expression calm, watching as Lily and Dan, absolutely glowing with excitement, prepared for their sweet beginning, somewhere far away. Lily, convinced she's some sort of world-class actress, looked at me with this bittersweet fondness, saying, "Take care of yourself, Mike," as if she actually cared. Dan played his part too. He was already in best day of my life mode, the heroic lover ready to board the plane with her into a bright new future. I sincerely wished them luck, and guys, that luck would begin right now. As soon as their taxi pulled away, I set off to make sure I didn't miss a single second of their romantic adventure. I reached the airport shortly after they did, spotting them, two lovebirds moving step by step towards the entrance. Well, folks, welcome to the random level of security checks. The first checkpoint, baggage inspection. A couple of security guards, normally bored out of their minds, perked up as soon as they spotted Lily and Dan, treating them like VIP guests. I saw the flicker of confusion cross Dan's face. He didn't fully understand what was going on yet, but his instincts were telling him something wasn't right. They asked him to open his suitcases. Lily kept smiling, but he kept checking his watch. "Not so fun now, huh, buddy?" I thought, watching from behind a column. The look on his face grew more strained, like he was stuck in some kind of farce. His cool confidence was getting hard to swallow, because this delay was only the beginning. Next up, a supplemental document check. Yes, the very random check for which I'd spent my precious time and a few phone calls. Lily was still murmuring something under her breath, but Dan... Oh, you could see the panic beginning to sink in. It finally clicked in his mind that something was off, but there was nothing he could do. He kept looking at his watch, as if it might somehow grant him a fast pass to a future where they were already airborne, on their way to their happily ever after. But no, buddy, you're staying here, so sit back and enjoy the show. As they went through yet another checkpoint, I stood nearby, hidden among other travelers, feeling like a master of my craft, a silent hunter cornering his prey. The minutes dragged on, and the spectacle I'd orchestrated was building momentum. Dan and Lily, our modern-day Romeo and Juliet, were starting to look like two terrified animals scurrying from one security point to the next, desperate to escape. Honestly, the whole thing was so epic I could barely contain my laughter. You know, when you're watching something so absurd, you can practically see a 404 error, confidence not found sign pop up on someone's forehead. That's exactly how Dan looked in that moment. First, they got held up at the baggage check. As soon as they cleared that, they were kindly invited to step aside for another inspection. I noticed how Lily, who had been practically glowing with confidence just 30 minutes before, was now getting visibly flustered with every passing minute. And Dan was standing there with the look of a man ready to swear off women forever, if only this nightmare would end. And there they were, back at security. This time, they were asked to show their documents for what felt like the 10th time. Lily was practically begging the airport staff to let them through, and I could see the agent sigh heavily, scrutinizing her passport while checking something on his tablet. "Sorry, miss, but we need a few more minutes," he said with an expressionless face. Lily looked like she was about to collapse into tears, while Dan's face was pure panic. But here's what really amused me. For the first time, instead of supporting Lily, he couldn't even bring himself to look her in the eyes. Then came the pièce de résistance. Just as the final boarding call was being announced, they were stopped once more, this time for real. "We've noticed some discrepancies with your tickets. We'll need to conduct an additional check." Dan tried to put on an act of innocence, but his confidence shattered entirely in that moment. I watched him exhale sharply and throw a desperate glance at Lily. She stood there, bewildered, as the realization that everything was unraveling in seconds finally hit her. I stood nearby, savoring every second. It was the best show of the year. This scene practically radiated drama, and honestly, it outshone any movie I'd ever seen. Then came the moment of truth. "Final boarding for this flight has closed," the announcement echoed. Dan and Lily stood there like two lost puppies, while I, hidden in the shadows, struggled to contain my laughter. Their plane lifted off, leaving behind an empty terminal, and even emptier expressions. For a second, Lily just stood there, as if someone had hit her over the head. But then, she literally collapsed to her knees, covering her face with her hands. The scene was epic. Her polished, carefully planned future had taken off without her, and her world seemed to crumble right along with it. It reminded me of those movie scenes where the heroine realizes that every card she played has failed, and all that's left is to admit defeat. Lily was beaten, and it showed on her face as clearly as if a headline were stamped across her: "When your dreams of happiness run off without you." Dan, on the other hand, looked like he was about to explode with rage. But this time, he didn't hold back. Instead, he lashed out at Lily, throwing accusations without restraint. "This is all your fault. You ruined everything. Why couldn't you just do as I said?" His voice was a mix of desperation and fury, like someone trapped in a nightmare they couldn't understand they had created. It was absolutely hilarious to watch them transform from the pretend-loving couple into genuine enemies. You know that feeling when everything goes wrong, but instead of admitting it, they started tearing each other apart like two predators backed into a corner? The irony was off the charts. In my mind, I congratulated Dan. "Congratulations, buddy. Here's your new life. Hope you're enjoying the first minute of it." That feeling, that moment when everything has played out exactly as you planned, and you stand there in triumph, is unforgettable. I hadn't just witnessed their foolish escape fall apart. I had memorized every glance, every step, every inch of despair on their faces. Their expressions, filled with humiliation, utter confusion, and raw fury, will stay with me forever. Dan tried to message me afterward, naturally. "Hey, we're having some issues. Could you maybe help us out?" It was so pathetic that I actually yawned. I left him on read. "Well, man, this is the path you chose, so go ahead and walk it alone." Lily didn't even try to contact me, and honestly, I wouldn't have bothered to open her messages if she had. The only thing I regretted was that I couldn't replay this spectacle in front of my eyes over and over again. The entire way home, I basked in that fierce mix of relief and dark satisfaction. I'd done what they never even dreamed of, and now they were reaping the consequences of their choices. It felt like the best revenge film of the year. Only this one played just for me.